fresh fish today. Best price.
In the bustling, hopeful world of Sierra Leone in 1832, a boy was born. His name was James Johnson, and his first cries were heard not in a quiet village hut, but within the walls of an African Methodist church. This church wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of a new beginning, founded just 11 years earlier by Black American settlers who had crossed the ocean in search of freedom. That childhood memory of an African church, built and led by African hands, would become the guiding star for his entire life. For James Johnson, faith and identity were two sides of the same coin. He would later sum it up in a simple, powerful motto:
God and my country.
As he grew, Johnson was educated in the Anglican Church, and his deep, sincere piety became his defining trait. People couldn't help but notice. In Nigeria, they would smile and call him Holy Johnson. In the far-off corridors of the CMS headquarters in London, they spoke of him with a mix of awe and unease as the Pope of Nigeria. He was a man who commanded respect, a true son of West Africa. And he had a burning conviction. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that given the same opportunities, Africans were just as capable as anyone else. But he watched as European missionaries, however well-intentioned, clung to control. They built a church that was for Africans, but not yet truly of Africa. This well-meaning protection, he argued, was actually a cage holding back the full flowering of African leadership. He looked across the savannah and saw another faith taking root. Islam, he noted, was succeeding not by replacing African customs, but by embracing them. It spoke to the people in a language they understood. This was the lesson, the key that he felt Christianity was missing. His great cause arrived in 1861 with the native pastorate in Sierra Leone. For Johnson, then a young tutor, it was a small step, but a step in the right direction. He saw it as the first brick in the foundation of a grand dream, a truly independent African church, a church that would one day unite all African Christians, sweeping aside the imported European denominations. It would even create its own liturgy, carefully weaving in the good, the true, and the beautiful from traditional beliefs to create a faith that was authentically and deeply African. But his vision was even larger than a church. He dreamed of an African Christian nation. In this nation, the British administration would support the church, even declaring Christianity the state religion. To serve in government would be more than a job. It would be a calling, guided by a code of Christian ethics. A golden opportunity to push for this dream arose in the vibrant, ambitious city of Lagos. The African elite there were tired of playing second fiddle in their own church. They were ready to take full control, to make the European missionaries unnecessary. Alarmed by this rising tide of nationalism, the CMS in London moved strategically. They decided to offer a compromise. They would bring the less dangerous native pastorate scheme to Lagos, and who better to lead it than James Johnson himself? In 1874, he was sent to Lagos. The hope was that his leadership would channel all that nationalist energy into a safe, manageable stream, keeping it within the bounds of the Anglican Church. 2 years later, a new door opened. The interior of Yorubaland was ready for missionaries again. The old veterans, Townsend and Hinderer, understood something crucial. The times had changed. To truly connect with the local population, an African leader was needed. A European face no longer held the same automatic authority. Townsend, the British missionary overseer, put forward a bold name: make James Johnson the Bishop of Abeokuta and all Yorubaland. It was a stunning proposal. But the younger generation of missionaries pushed back hard. They were not ready for an African bishop. A compromise was struck. Johnson was made superintendent of the interior missions. His mission: reopen the old stations and build a self-sufficient church. He threw himself into the work with such energy, such visionary passion, that the missionaries on the ground grew nervous. They watched him and saw their worst fears coming true. A man building an independent church, one step at a time, and looking very much like a bishop in waiting. In 1880, they pulled him back. He was removed from the interior and returned to a simple parish in Lagos. For the nationalists, this was the final proof. James Johnson's removal wasn't just a disappointment, it was fuel on a fire. Immediately, 4 new Nigerian-owned newspapers sprang up in Lagos, their pages filled with passionate arguments for the African cause. They demanded a greater voice for the people in church affairs, and some even dared to raise the thorny issues of African customs like polygamy, which the European Church had so roundly condemned. When the aging bishop, Samuel Ajayi Crowther, the first African Anglican bishop, neared the end of his life, the West African press was united. There was only one man to succeed him: James Johnson. But in the hushed boardrooms of London, Johnson's name was dismissed. His qualifications were universally acknowledged, his piety beyond question. But his crime, in their eyes, was his racial feelings and his nationalistic stance, his divisive sentiments for their own course. He was too African, too proud, too much of a dreamer. He was passed over. James Johnson lived to see the Nigerian church grow, but he also saw its struggles. His dream of a unified, independent African church remained just out of reach. The later African churches that did break away would eventually grapple with the same questions he had raised, like the place of polygamy in a Christian society. They made their own choices, but often, as history notes, the difficult decisions came after the separation, not before. James Johnson, the man with a heart woven from faith and patriotism, died in 1917. He didn't live to see his African Christian nation, but he had planted a seed, a powerful idea that an African faith must, ultimately, be shaped by African hands. Today we can all testify to the fact that the Africans in West Africa, Nigeria, and even the old colony of Lagos are largely Christians and have a culture of Christianity woven into them. His story is a reminder that the greatest revolutions don't always happen in a single dramatic moment. Sometimes they begin with a simple, stubborn belief that your God and your country are not separate worlds, but one and the same, and that the church, like the people it serves, must find its own voice.